Hello, we're at St. Louis U High today, Thursday, May the 29th, 2025, and we're here as part of the Oral History Project, which is part of the St. Louis U Archives. Today we're pleased to have Mr. Rich Moran as an interviewee for the Oral History Project. Rich originally was graduated from SLUH in 1966 and began his teaching career, I think in what, 1980?
I think it was 1980,
Rich,
yeah,
so
yeah.
he had a 40-year teaching career here.
Yeah.
Want to welcome you and thank you for coming to school and that.
It's good to be here, Bob. Thank you.
Let's start at the very beginning. First of all, was your 4 years, were you the first one in your family, or did you have older brothers how did you come to St. Louis U High as a student back in '62?
By this point, we were living out in North County, so it was a long way from SLUH. But I had two cousins, one John Kissel and one John Moran, on both sides of my family, who had attended SLUH, and they were really bright.
John Kissel, I think, was a classmate of mine. He became a doctor, and was my physician for many years.
Yeah.
He's a relative?
He's my cousin.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Second cousin, I guess. Yeah.
But he is related.
Yeah. And
so
I just admired both of these guys.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And they came here, and then you decided that's how you. That's what I was wondering. That's kind of the connection that brought you to school.
Yeah.
And did you have a good 4 years here?
I loved my time here.
Yeah.
You
then graduated, went on, got higher degrees. But who hired you when you came here as a teacher in 1980, Rich?
Well, actually, it started with I substituted for Paul Rossi, who was an English teacher at SLUH, for about 3 or 4 weeks while he had knee surgery and was at home.
Okay.
And so that would have been in 1979, I think. And I moved to St. Louis at the beginning of that year. I was working as a picture framer someplace. And I heard that, I happened to go into Leo Dressel's office and say, hey, if you ever need a teacher, I'm in the neighborhood.
He was the principal at the time?
He was the principal at the time. And so I substituted for Paul Rossi for those weeks, and I just really hit it off with my colleagues. And I think I didn't hear any more after that left, except when Jim Ratterman, who was the chair of the department, called.
That's the thing. Who was the chair at the time? Jim Ratterman?
Jim was the Ratterman, and Jim Ratterman was, and he asked if I was interested in the job. They had a pretty good look-see at me, I think.
So then you were offered a full-time position in 1980?
Yeah, that's
in the English department?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I taught alongside a guy named Bill Noonan. We were both, there were 8 sections of sophomores. He taught 4 of them, and I taught 4 of them. Okay. And he was the best teacher I've ever seen.
Really?
Yeah. And
his name again was?
Bill Noonan.
Bill Noonan, good English teacher.
Dr. Bill Noonan.
And he was a good teacher.
He was a great teacher.
Wow.
And he's also a very generous colleague. And we would speak every night before, about the next day's classes. And drove his wife crazy sometimes, I think. But we had long discussions. And it was he was in fact, nobody named him my mentor, but he served as my mentor.
Yes.
But we treated each other as colleagues, and I just learned so much about it. I had already taught high school in Massachusetts for 3 years. And I taught at Tufts just as a writing instructor for some years before that. So I had experience teaching, but I really learned how to think of what helps students to learn from Bill. I love his memory.
Rich, I wondered about a number of things, but the mix of the student body in 1980 was far less diverse than what it was in your later years.
Yeah.
How did you and the department react? I mean, I know there had been an effort over several decades to not just geographically, but diversify the student body. How did that affect you as an English teacher, and what challenges did you meet with that diversity of African Americans, Asians, and
yeah, I don't think of it as first of all, I should say that much of the racial diversification of SLUH took place by in the last 4 years or so since I stopped teaching at SLUH.
So really most recently.
Quite recently, although
Okay.
the African American population was growing before then. And, you know, as a teacher, you take things one student at a time.
Right.
You deal with the student that you have. Yeah, yeah. I've been thinking a lot about the difference in the student body since 1962. I guess,
Right, when you first started, yes.
When I first came to SLUH. And, you know, my tuition as a freshman was $240 a year.
$240 a year, not a semester?
A year.
A year, wow.
$60 a quarter.
Wow.
And by the time I left, it's gone way up to $400 a year. And, you know, now it's 100 times that. It's $2,400 or so.
Yes.
A little bit more than that, I think,
Right.
actually, for the coming year.
Yes.
And so that's a tremendous, you know, the rate of overall inflation in those years, I checked it last night, would have been about 10%. So what was $240 then would be about $2,400 now.
Yeah.
So there are many changes that have taken place that account for that change. One of which is the school just decided that people who could afford it should be paying more, and people who could not afford it should be getting scholarship help.
Financial
tuition
aid.
assistance, yeah, financial aid. So, but as I think about it, if I were, you know, my family would probably have suffered from sticker shock if they saw
Oh, yes.
$24,000.
Same here, yes.
And so I wonder how that affects the profile of the student body that we have, you know.
Well, that gets into what you would call the core identity of the school.
Yeah.
You had said to me in some conversations about, of course, there used to be, when you and I applied, admission tests that you had to sit for, and that's no longer the case, as I understand
I
it.
think they may have reinstituted those in the last year or two.
Oh, okay. Well, there for a number of years, I know
That's right.
it was a different thing, but
So they were using the tests that kids got in school,
yes,
but there were schools that didn't offer
right.
the Iowa Basic Skills Test or the California test, whatever it was. And so that sort of freed the school up to take the students they wanted to take without regard to their testing profile, I think.
One of the things that we've explored with some of the other former teachers like yourself, academics has always been a strong point for St. Louis U High, but now there's much more, I guess you'd say, extracurricular. I know there's something like 74 clubs, and one of the things we explored when you and I were students here way back in the 60s, as I recall, theology or religion was a 3-day-a-week thing, and now in recent years it's gone to 5 days. So to go to 5 days for that, they had to cut something.
Yeah.
Was the English department, among other departments, affected by those changes?
I think probably classes they had been 50 minutes and they became 45 minutes. But I think the impact on other classes was greater. We continued to teach 5 days a week.
English department.
English classes were 5 days a week, yeah. But there were, I think it affected the arts probably more.
Well, we just,
yes. And phys ed, I think, we all did phys ed twice a week, as I remember. And I think many students don't do phys ed anymore.
I see. Well, I just wonder what kind of, because everything's, I know, in balance, and each department has to fight for its own resources, Dad. How about the composition of the teacher corps over your years? Did that change? I know, for one thing, that the Jesuit numbers reduced dramatically.
Yeah, I think I counted up last night that there were 32 Jesuits on the faculty in 1963-64.
Wow.
And there are probably about 4 or 5
now,
I would think. And so at that time, there were a fair number of lay teachers, maybe 17 lay teachers, if I counted correctly. It was all in this buzz book that I have in my hand here.
Right.
But I think many of those lay teachers were hired as coaches first and then teachers.
For the different sports,
They needed coaches, and the Jesuits weren't generally the coaches of the high-profile sports.
Right, football, basketball,
So a guy like Paul Mortell or Ebby Dunn or Emmett Hannick, they came here partly because of their
coaching background.
Coach. Yeah. And so, but then I think by the time I arrived here, Father Sheehan, who was the principal when I was a student and no longer the principal when I came back as a teacher. But Father Sheehan, I think, had decided that he wanted, well, in the absence of a lot of free labor
Yes.
from Jesuit scholastics, I think he wanted teachers who arrived with some academic intensity. And
So there was an upgrade, I guess you'd call it? or-
yeah, although I mean, I want to be clear here that teachers like Emmett Hennick and Ebby Dunn were really good teachers.
Yes,
Yeah. So I'm not, but that I think, and in the English department especially, Ray Windle, who was the chair of the department back then, was delighted to hire a series of PhD teachers and to upgrade the academic intensity of English in that way.
You mentioned Father Ray Windle, who was an English teacher and I guess the head of the department. He had a reputation of being somewhat of a character and a wild man at times. Was he easy to work with?
I did not work under him, and he did not teach me.
Okay.
But I know from the people
Yes.
who took over when he left that his intensity had good features and bad features.
Yes,
right.
Well, I had him as a teacher, and I can remember some
he would
displays
have
of
outburst and
outburst. Was
I mean, there were stories when I was at SLUH of his dragging students out of their desk into the hallway.
Yes, I saw that physically.
And I had conversations with him back in those years when I came here to teach, and I admired his intellectual
Abilities.
abilities and inspiration, you know. But I was glad that I didn't have to work under him, because my friends would talk about getting calls at 2 in the morning from him, you know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, teachers would.
I didn't know about that, but I do know about the physics, because I saw him drag kids out of the class when I was a student here myself.
Yeah.
And you've commented, I mean, the dwindling number of Jesuits and the increase in the number of lay faculty, but the increase that they all have, I won't say all, but pretty high percentage have advanced degrees now. I mean, they're
That's right.
masters and PhDs in that.
Yeah.
What about the addition of female faculty to the staff? That certainly increased. We were talking about diversity, but the faculty went from, because when I was here, Miss Irene Coyle was the only lady, if you want to call her a librarian. And now I think about 40% of the faculty is female, is it not?
Yeah.
And how did that affect not just your department, but I mean, were the men teachers receptive to the increase of the female?
Oh, as far as I know, they were.
Yeah.
I think it was a rough go for female teachers with their students when they first came here.
Yes, I was wondering about that.
And a lot of the early female teachers were foreign language teachers, I think.
Oh.
And some of them were actually from native countries.
Yes, like China.
Native speakers,
Yes, I remember that.
And I think that students could be pretty cruel. And I think they were particularly cruel to those.
Oh, really?
To those women.
Did the school, I mean, the administration address that at any point? I mean, are trying to correct that? Do you know?
I don't really know.
I just wondered.
I guess I want to say that what I remember about SLUH when I left, I really loved my experience here. But I knew nothing about women except what I knew from my mom. And I think it's a valuable thing.
Oh, yes.
To have women teachers.
Oh, yeah.
It might be valuable to have women students as well, but that's not
That's
happening.
another question.
That's another question. But I think to have female teachers who the students respect and learn from is a really prepares them to live in the real world, you know.
You mentioned the tremendous increase in the tuition over the years. I think now it's, approaching $24,000 a year, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
But one of the things I've always been impressed with and supportive of SLUH, I mean, they really have made an effort at financial aid for those who can't otherwise afford it. Does that create, though, a two-tier system? I mean, if you've got students from not just West County, but from well-to-do families who can't afford it, and then you have students who really need not just financial aid, I'm thinking of students who maybe can't afford to go to the prom because they can't afford different things. Have you noticed, or during your tenure here, was there any kind of a problem or tension that you witnessed or experienced?
Well, first of all, I want to say that those tensions were there when I was a student.
Yes.
Not because of tuition, but because in general, the students who lived along the West Corridor here, I think we all knew came from more affluent families.
Right, I experienced
and it seemed like there was a cultural difference between those of us from North and South County and those who lived in West County. And I don't know that that's any more true now than it was then. I think students are probably generally unaware of who's here with tuition assistance and who's not. I think probably more than half the students receive some.
Oh yeah, I think it's about 45% from what I've read, yes. Which is a tremendous, and this is not a couple $100. I mean, I think I read where the average thing is about $9,500. The average, that's a big chunk of money to come up with, you know. And I know when Dave Laughlin was here and when we met with him with the archives effort, he was very concerned about raising enough money, because I think at that time it was like $4 million a year. Now it's up to, I think, $5 million a year to help with substantial financial aid, you know.
Yeah, with that tuition sticker as high as it is.
Oh, yes.
That's necessary. And I guess what I'm saying is, with so many students receiving financial assistance is probably less of a brand.
Right, which is good. I mean, it make people stand out or make, I hear you.
Right.
That's good.
Yeah.
Rich, with the English curriculum, did that change over the years? And I'm thinking particularly, I mean, you're teaching about writing and reading that, but you also have a number of books that the students are required to read. And I know there's controversy in society now, not just here at St. Louis U High, about what books can be taught or read and what books couldn't. Did you run into any of that here at SLUH during your 40 years at teaching?
I did, really, mostly towards the end.
Tension or what?
Yeah, there was controversy about one of the books that I taught, and it led to years of contention about that book, which was Plainsong by Kent Harif. It was a book I was really thought was valuable for the students to read.
Yes.
And yet it had some scenes that were explicit.
Graphic, yeah.
Yeah, graphic. And I kind of understood parents were disturbed by that, and yet what I saw among the students was that they learned things about women and about farm life, but especially one of the really, I thought maybe one of the most valuable things about the book was it caused our students to identify with the young female protagonist in the book. And to see what life was like for her.
Right.
And that seemed invaluable to me, but also the book was just a delight to teach because of how much thought and empathy went into the creation of the book. And so, you know, I had difficult discussions with many parents, and so did the administration.
Well, that was, did you get support from the administration?
I did. It wasn't just me, but other.
No, I can imagine, there's others as well. But I mean, I understand what you're saying, that certain parents were concerned, as keeps being reported in society, and some of the school districts now have really changed. I'm not talking about St. Louis U High, but it's shocking sometimes the change in that.
Bob, I want to mention here that my senior English teacher at SLUH, Bill Keene, he was a Jesuit, suggested to us off the curriculum, but he said, I think you guys would really enjoy reading Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah, I remember.
And he said, you know, if I taught in a public school, I might get in trouble for saying that. But I know that if parents objected to that, they would go to the principal, and the principal would say, well, you can take your son someplace else.
Good response.
That made him feel confident that he was being allowed to
and had the
to make
support.
judgments about what was best for the students. And I continued to feel that, although I understood parents' concerns.
The tension, It's a challenge for teachers today, for sure.
It is, and I think the way in which texts are selected for English classes has changed somewhat over the years. In my early years here, individual teachers made decisions about what books they would teach.
Okay.
So even if there were 3 or 4 sophomore English
Yes.
teachers, as there were, after the first couple of years, we would make different choices in some cases. And in some ways, each of those choices was like a pilot project. And we could report back to our colleagues, how did this work? I remember teacher Mark Cummings decided that he thought the play Master Harold and the Boys would be a really good play for students to read. He did it in his class, reported back to us, and then gradually more and more of us taught that book in our class. But this became, some of the books became like experiments. And sometimes you teach a book and you think that wasn't that great. I taught a book called Gabriel's Song. I think that was it, Gabriel's Story, Gabriel's Song. And I thought it was going to be a really great book to teach. And then after a couple times, I ceased to believe in the value of the book,
Yeah.
It seemed not to.
But you came to that conclusion on your own.
I came to that conclusion on my own.
Yeah.
And so more and more, I think the curriculum is consolidated, not entirely, but if teachers teaching the same class teach the same books. A decision was made a few years ago no longer to teach Huckleberry Finn
Yes.
to freshmen at SLUH. Because
Not here at SLUH.
not here at SLUH.
Was that from the English department itself, or outside pressure, or what?
There was outside pressure at one point, but we resisted that.
Okay.
But I think some of the teachers decided they were not comfortable with the racial language in the book and with how that might affect the students. And so that didn't lead to some teachers teaching it and some not, but to a freshman teacher decision not to teach the book, as I understand it. This actually happened after I left SLUH, so
Yeah.
I know it more by rumor than, So, and in general, there's been, like in the junior year, some teachers would teach Othello and some would teach Hamlet. That was mostly based upon whether it was honors or non-honors class. But I remember a teacher who decided to teach Coriolanus instead. So there were experiments like that would happen with the curriculum. And one of the things that it gave us teachers, I think, was the feeling to be passionate about the books we were teaching. Rather than teaching a book that somebody else was passionate about, you were teaching a book that you were
passionate about and felt had real merit.
Yeah, and the ultimate objective of these choices was reading and writing.
Yes.
But what I think what we were experimenting with is, what are the best tools with which to teach that to this group of students? So.
Well, it sounds like there was good collaboration within the English department, was there?
It was great.
Yeah, it was good. You felt very...
It was a wonderful department.
Because that makes a big difference if you've got a good, like you say, collaboration among your peers that, and sharing, what works, what doesn't work, and why certain
we had
books or...
one big room that was our office, and we were talking to each other
Constantly.
all the time about how this class went, how that class went, how these books were going. It was.
Now, this is a strange question, but when you say a number of you in the same office, I've noticed with the renovation of the chapel, where they cut off the back third, and there's on the second level there's 3 academic offices, not stuffed, but there's multiple things, and below that there's one big apostolic ministry thing. Now, apostolic ministry didn't exist when I was here back in the 60s. So I've always been kind of confused, or not confused, but where did this all come from? And as an old graduate, it seemed kind of strange to me that you'd have 3 academic programs, not stuffed, but I mean, math and English and
social studies,
language.
Language, okay,
Yeah, I think those are the 3, and multiple teachers. And then that same space it takes up on the second floor, 3 hardcore things. And then you've got apostolic ministry taking up this big space on the back of the old chapel on the ground floor. It just seemed to me to be not
Well,
incongruent, but
yeah.
I don't understand that from the perspective of somebody who went here 60 years ago.
Well, I think I can explain a little bit.
Please.
I think they generally refer to themselves as the pastoral department.
Yes.
Okay. And in general, they don't have a classroom they're working in.
Uh-huh.
And so they're meeting with students in that
I see.
space.
Okay.
And so there's lots of planning that goes on in that office, but there's also meetings with students.
And like you say, they don't teach in a classroom.
yeah.
I see what you're saying. That makes a point.
But you've also put your finger on another big change that's occurred in the school, which is the more explicit emphasis on religious values at the school.
Uh-huh.
I kind of think when we were students, the presence of the Jesuits among us was thought to be the source of religious inspiration.
I agree with that
But
view.
as those numbers dwindled,
Uh-huh.
the school and the Jesuits in general were left with trying to figure out other ways
Uh-huh.
to instill Christian values in students.
Uh-huh.
And this led to a good deal of anxiety, I think. You
Uh-huh.
know? And I remember the first year I was here, I think the provincial, Dave Fleming, came to us and said that he wanted the Jesuits to be the people who animated us
Uh-huh.
in teaching.
Uh-huh.
I actually found that a little offensive. Like,
Yeah.
We were not animated on our
Yeah,
on
yeah.
our own, you know.
Right, yeah,
So,
yeah.
and there was always and I think in general like the word Ignatian, which you hear very
yes.
often around here, is a word I don't remember ever hearing as a student at SLUH.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we'd hear about Loyola, Ignatius Loyola.
Yes.
But and would hear about Jesuit ways of doing things.
Yeah.
But I kind of think that the young Jesuits in the 80s or 70s were rebelling against the old Jesuits.
Ah.
You know, the model of Jesuit teaching that I witnessed involved some more mockery of students.
Uh-huh.
And teachers slamming pointers down on the desk in front of you.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yes.
There was more, you know.
Yes.
And I think the young Jesuits probably rebelled against that. And they wanted
interesting observation.
a more humane version of Jesuit teaching.
Uh-huh.
So they chose this word Ignatian. This is my theory.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
And there was a meeting of the Jesuit Secondary Association, which they came up with a preamble to what they were trying to.
I see.
Trying to do.
Uh-huh.
And I think that was a major inflection in what the life inside the classroom was like. It's
Very interesting.
And it became. I don't think when the lay teachers that were hired at SLUH were hired when you and I were there.
Yes.
Were hired because of their ability to inculcate religious values in students.
Yeah.
They were coaches, or they knew
right.
math, or they, you know.
Yeah.
But that became a more explicit index for hiring, I think, as time
I
went
see.
on.
Interesting observation.
Yeah.
Well, like you say, I remember 30 some odd Jesuits when I was here and teaching, and I can see when I come back, but there's hardly you don't see many Jesuits. There's I think 4 on the entire faculty as opposed to 30 something, you know.
You know, and those Jesuits that taught us, the Jesuit scholastics that taught us,
Yes.
were totally inexperienced as teachers.
Yes, I know.
So they taught for 3 years.
Yes.
And we got their first 3 years.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a history teacher named Alonzo Smith, who didn't really know any history.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Father Sheehan acknowledged this to me later on, that they just had to put these people in the classroom.
Right.
And so we spent the entire year outlining the history book.
Uh-huh.
And you would never have a teacher do that.
Right. No, I remember because you mentioned Dave Fleming. He was a scholastic when I was here.
Yeah.
As was Ralph Houlihan. I mean, and it was their first years ever teaching. So, it was quite an experience. An interesting point, though, that you make.
And so really, one of the effects of the dwindling of the number of Jesuits, especially scholastics, has been the professionalization of the teaching staff, I think, you know.
And is that good, you think?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that the Jesuit scholastics didn't deliver
Yeah, but
a real value.
Yeah.
But I think probably the teachers are more respected now than they were then.
And isn't there more of an emphasis with the lay teachers about professional development? I know some of the other teachers have mentioned that over the years there was money available that you could attend national conferences or go to meetings that initially, I mean, back in the old days, it wasn't the case.
Yeah, that also means though that teachers leave their classes.
Yes.
To go do that.
Yes.
And I'm not. I mean, it's good to do it during the summer, it seems to me.
But not during the year.
But I want teachers there was recently this case with when the tornadoes hit St. Louis.
Yes.
The guy who was supposed to push the button, or the person who was supposed to push the button, was at a workshop.
Right, I read that.
And that seemed to me to typify some of what happens. When you have substitutes come into the classroom, everybody pretends that something's going to happen, but not much happens, I think,
Talking about, just attendance, when I was here, and probably you too, you did a retreat senior year at the White House, but the first 3 years, we had a day or days of recollection. Now I understand every class does at least one, and sometimes more, out-of-school retreat.
Yeah.
Does that affect not just the English department, but students are taken, I guess, out of class. What I'm getting at is this out-of-class type of thing. Does it disrupt the flow of your curriculum throughout the year?
Sure.
Yeah.
But there's a value to it as well.
No, that's what I'm trying to explore. Yes.
Yeah, but when students and there's very explicit emphasis that you may not penalize students for being absent for retreats, which makes sense, right? School wants them to go on retreats.
Yeah.
But it does make the delivery of instruction or the encouraging of learning a little less dependable, I think. And that's true not just of retreats. It's also true of sporting events.
Oh.
I mean, students miss many more periods because there's an early tournament, or
or they have to go out of town to get to. Yeah.
So I think when we were students, there were nobody missed school for sports.
Right.
But except for maybe a state tournament.
Right, a state, yes.
Yeah.
But now it's more frequent. I see what you're saying.
Yeah. When you look at a list of absences now from the school, it's really long. Every day it's long.
Really?
There are all kinds of reasons that students are not here. And I remember when I arrived from teaching at public school, at the public school I taught at, I think sort of 10% of the students were absent every day. And when I got to SLUH, I'd see a list of like 6 students who were absent that day from SLUH. Well, that number's much greater now for various reasons.
Yeah.
Partly, I think parents have more money and travel more and pull their kids out of school.
Yeah.
And there are various reasons why it happens.
Rich, in addition to your teaching in the classroom, I know you were involved with Sisyphus, the student publication. Were you also involved at all with Prep News?
Not really, except as somebody who rooted for the Prep News.
Okay.
But
what about Sisyphus? That's been a long time student publication, hasn't it?
Yeah, it started, I think, maybe the year before I came to SLUH.
It started in my year, a few years before you. I remember
Well, there were other, as I remember, there were literary magazines with other names. I think when I was a student at SLUH, it was called Tangents.
Tangents?
Does that name sound familiar to you?
Yes.
Okay. And so the literary magazine would come and go. One of the features of Sisyphus is that it's existed pretty much publishing 2 times a year, every year for the last 45 years or so.
But you were involved with the moderating or guiding that, weren't you, for some years?
I still am.
Oh, you still are?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So Frank Kavorik and I moderate the magazine, and now we have an art moderator, Maddie Kleinberg, as well. It's become a more expensive and lavish operation at this time. It's all, we're now doing all color. The artwork looks splendid in the magazine. So
it's evolved over the years to a more professional type of magazine?
Yeah, I mean, when I first came, Bill George was the moderator, and they would actually run the magazine off on mimeograph machines and hand it out there.
Now it's a printed
now we
thing.
send it to a printer, and we can therefore lay it out in more professional ways as well.
What other policy changes? I mean, one of the things I'm always curious about, and especially over a 40-year career, the principal and the president changed several times, I'm sure, during that 40-year thing.
Yeah.
Did you notice much difference? And I realize they don't always come together.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
they're not out of sync, but I mean, the presidents come and go, the principals come and go on their own schedule. Did the principal role affect you more as a teacher than the president's role, or vice versa?
I think in general, the principal's role affects the teachers more.
Yes.
But the president's role affects the entire school as a whole, you know.
Did you notice much change from administration to administration? I mean, in terms of priorities or style?
Yeah, I certainly did.
I mean, were some more supportive of the teachers? Because one of the things that has changed in our time, I mean, there were relatively few administrators when you and I were here in the 60s, and now the number of non-teachers, I know there's 4 or 5 assistant principals of some kind or another that didn't exist. I mean, there was Father Sheehan, who was the principal, and I think the first year I was here it was George Pieper, and then Father Bailey, who later became principal himself. But that was it. I mean, we didn't have all those other positions, and that's changed over the years.
Yeah, it's become, the administration has become much more prominent. I think in the first 30 years I was here at SLUH, it was a teacher's school.
A teacher's school.
And by that I mean we teachers made decisions about what we're going to do in our classes.
Yeah.
And more the administrators want to make it into an administrator's school. And if you had to justify that, you'd say they wanted there to be fewer gaps through which students fell. You know? And they wanted policies, and they wanted those policies enforced. And they wanted more careful supervision of teachers. And this makes for a lot of workshop days in which the students or the teachers do exercises to inculcate the models that the administration wants. It's a big change.
Yeah.
So what happens in the classroom is, when I say it's an administrator school, there are more ways in which the administration wants to ensure that that their decisions are being carried through in the classroom. You know, and I see reasons for that. There's been 1 or 2 teachers we've had who nobody was paying much attention to, and they were probably negligent in what they did. And I think that the administration's been more careful to try to prevent that. But it makes the act of teaching probably less creative and independent. Yeah. You know. So I have.
Well, with all of these policies or decisions, I mean, there's, I won't say, well, kind of tensions. I mean, in terms of different points of view, and then it's a balancing act to find the right balance so that it's not too far out of whack one way or the other.
Yeah, and in general, you know, teachers don't like those all-day sessions.
No.
Which are workshops.
Yeah, workshops.
Because some of the stuff that happens there may apply, but some of it doesn't, you know.
With getting back to Sisyphus again, do you get good interest or support from the students? I mean, is there, if not a demand, I mean, how many students actually can or do participate in something like the Sisyphus program?
Well, you know, you have your people who are producing the magazine and those who are reading it.
Yes. And
so we have about 24 students who are editors of one sort or another on the magazine.
24?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then there were other students who are contributing to the magazine who are not on staff, but
contributed to
much of what we publish comes from students who are not on the staff.
Right.
The staff's making decisions about what to publish. But the staff also contributes. You know?
Yes.
And then we print about 325 copies of the magazine twice a year.
Uh-huh.
And those are the numbers that are, we sell them for a quarter.
Quarter?
They cost about $7 to produce each
Wow.
magazine. So it's a big loss.
Yeah.
Economically. But the idea is to get the magazine in the hands of students
You're right.
who care at least a quarter's worth
Yeah.
about reading it and having it. So,
Oh, that's,
yeah.
well, I know we were at the archives, we're always trying to keep, you
Yeah.
know, current copies, or not current, but I
We
mean.
appreciate that.
Oh,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
no, we want that
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
historical
Yeah.
purpose,
Yeah.
to have a history of
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
issues that have come
Yeah.
out over the
Yeah.
years. Rich, you mentioned not involvement, but support for the Prep News. How has the Prep News changed over the years from your days and my days here as students, and now at the publication?
Well, as I remember the Prep News when we were students, it came out sometimes, you never knew when.
Yeah, it wasn't regular.
And there might have been 3 or 4 issues a year.
Yeah.
And that probably changed from year to year according to who the moderator was.
Yes.
And, you know, since I've been a teacher here, it comes out more or less every week.
It's weekly, okay.
It's about the only weekly high school newspaper in the area, I think. And it's a project of passion for the moderators and for the teachers. I mean, for the moderators and for the students who work on it.
And is there tension between the students and not just the moderators, but the school? Because, I mean, with every newspaper, there's usually tension.
There are moments
yes.
in which the moderator is called to the president's office or something.
Oh, really?
That has certainly happened over time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, it takes some finesse and some guts to publish what's regarded as relevant and truthful.
But it's a great experience for the students, and it shows their interest in a variety of issues or topics that need to be explored, I think.
As you probably know, there are many of these editors who work for the Prep News who are doing professional.
Oh, yeah.
John Wagner's the breaking news editor of the Washington Post.
Yes.
Nick Fandos is a reporter for the New York Times.
Yes, I know they've gone on to, I mean, notable careers.
Jim Santel was a speechwriter for the Attorney General at one point, so, yeah.
You mentioned Jerry Sheehan, who is the principal way back and who had a profound effect, but you said he was no longer principal when you taught here, but he was back. But a lot of the teachers that I've talked to, the old timers like yourself, give him credit for the upgrade to the academic standard of St. Lucie High, that he really upgraded and like he added foreign languages, I think Chinese, biology, I think was added under his tenure or his thing, and then like you say, the challenge of meeting the dwindling number of Jesuits and the increase in lay staff and having professional things. Did you have much contact or exposure to him at school?
Well, probably you and I had the same amount of contact with him. He was sort of a remote figure for us as students. Yeah. Because he was directing the teachers.
Right.
But I agree with everything you said about his influence on the school. He made this school a school that really pursued academic excellence, I think, you know?
Yes.
When I came, the motto was beyond academic excellence. I think that was the phrase that the principal then, Leo Dressel, had given. It always seemed to me a little presumptuous that we were working beyond academic excellence. I mean, you might say academic excellence and beyond.
Yeah.
But beyond seemed to belittle the first part.
I see your point, yes.
You know, this was a school whose identity in the area, I think, was built on the challenges that it delivered to students. And I had a conversation once with a gentleman named David Page, who was the director of food services for the St. Louis Public Schools.
Okay.
I had a job working for a group called the Issue Seminar. This is before I came to SLUH.
Yes.
In the St. Louis Public Schools. And he told me a story about, at some point, he or his wife went to Father Sheehan and said, well, they had some questions about decisions that were being made for their son. And the principal said, well, you know, really, you're giving us your son. You're trusting us, you know. And we now know there are hazards to trust like that, you know. But it also, you know, it's something that happens in many cultures, that the children are taken away from their parents they're subjected to hard tests, challenging tests that they have to pass in order to become adults. And I think SLUH was a place where you knew you were being, you're going to be stressed.
Yes, challenged.
And you had to measure up.
Right.
When I first came here at SLUH, by the end of the first semester, you had to have at least a 1.6.
Yes,
And by the
great
end
point, yes.
And at the end of the first year, you had to have a 2.0 or something like that,
yes.
to stay at the school.
Yes.
Well, there's nothing like that now.
No standards like that, or?
I'm not saying decisions aren't sometimes made. But the school's more humane.
Humane.
For good or bad, And I think the attitude probably is, we want to make it possible for you to succeed. We're going to give you the support you need. Whereas the attitude when we were there is, you got to do this, And there are advantages and disadvantages to both.
I shouldn't take time out from it, but I want to tell you a brief Father Sheehan story of my own.
Yeah, please.
When we were here, if you recall, freshman year, 1E and 1F were actually the top two classes, and then it was A, B, C.
Yeah. An attempt to camouflage what was going on.
And I was in 1B, and I had Father Sheehy, a Spitfire of a algebra teacher, a little guy.
Yeah.
And he was in homeroom, and after, I don't know, midterms or something, we were in algebra class one day, and Father Sheehan came in, talked with Father Sheehy at the podium where he's in, and with that, Sheehy yells out, "St. Vrain, get up here!" And I'm thinking, what? So I walk up, and I'm literally like, because here's the principal. And Father Sheehan says to me, "Bob, go get your books, your things, you're coming with me." And I said, oh my God, what's going on? I was shaking.
Yeah.
And she was of no help, and so I go back.
And nobody felt they owed you an explanation.
No!
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, when we got out into the hallway, I think I had turned white, was shaking, thinking, he's going to kick me out of school. What did I do in it?
Yeah.
And with that, Father Sheehan looked at me, he says, "It's okay, Bob. We're just moving some students around. You're going to a different class." So
You were moved up.
I did get moved up,
Yeah,
but the point was I was so scared, thinking, why is the principal here? And Chef Father Sheehan, as you know, was always a gentle, kind soul. I mean, he was not intimidating, but he was intimidating the fact that he was the principal, and he comes in and Father Sheehan is, "Get up here," St. Vrain. But but he was always a gentleman and somebody who I greatly admired, like you.
Yeah.
Let me throw out a couple other names while we're doing. You've mentioned a couple, but colleagues of yours. Well, Father Bailey was a prominent principal and president, and started Kashba. Did you have much affiliation or dealings with Father Bailey?
I was never in Father Bailey's class. But he was around, and we talked a lot.
Yes.
He's the only person who's ever been at the same time the principal, the president, and the rector of the Jesuit
community.
No,
I didn't know he was all three.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And he was a worldly, kind of cosmopolitan.
Oh, yes, very cosmopolitan, yeah.
And a smoothie in a lot of ways,
Yes.
He also had a temper sometimes.
Did he?
At one point, when I was a student, our English teacher, Father Kane, I think
William Kane
had gone to a World Series game, and therefore our class was released. And we went out just outside the middle door on the upper field side. And we were listening to ball games, screwing around. And Father Bailey came out, and he was irate and jugged us all.
Oh.
And in retrospect, I think he was probably angry at the priest for not being
Yes, not being there to conduct class.
We were the ones.
You were the one that paid the price.
He could punish,
Right.
But Father Bailey was always fun to talk with. He had a lot of jokes.
Yes.
And
well, like you say, he was very cosmopolitan. He was.
He could do anything without making. He refinished furniture.
Yes.
I went and picked strawberries with him one time.
I understand he was a good golfer too.
He was the coach of my golf team.
He was. You played. Okay.
Yeah. And but I think I had this from somebody else actually, that he could pick. He could spend the day picking strawberries, and he would be wearing white clothes
Yeah,
and not have any strawberry stains on him.
That sounds like
Whereas
fun.
when I picked strawberries, they'd come out mostly red from the activity. So but he had a huge effect upon.
Well,
the
I know
school,
he
not
was
just with Cashbaugh,
yes,
but
yes,
with Cashbaugh as well.
yeah,
And he could connect to people with money.
yeah, could he? Yeah,
It was a real loss to the school
Uh-huh.
when he was dispatched to Smet.
yeah, yeah. How about Charlie Conway, a lay teacher? Did you have much contact with
He was
Charlie?
my chemistry teacher in
Yes.
my junior year, and he was an excellent chemistry teacher. I loved chemistry.
Did you?
And
He was a good
because
teacher, yes.
He was a good teacher.
And he became an administrator, didn't he, later?
He was an assistant principal, and I think he was probably pretty bad at it.
Oh,
He had a sort of Pink Panther
oh,
identity around the school, where he would sort of sneak around corners and peek around corners and see things to happen.
I see.
See things happening. It was a role that didn't fit him very well.
I got you, yeah.
And then he left the school once or twice with the idea of becoming a priest.
Oh, I did not know
And
that.
then he returned to the school.
I did not
and
know
he taught
that.
theology.
Oh,
And he had no idea. His head was in the clouds of higher level theology.
I got you.
And the students who had him would just talk about they didn't know what he was talking about
I
in class
see.
at all.
I didn't know he had
But he was
thought of going.
He was
into
really
the-
he was a really kind man.
Yes, yeah. Another, I think it was chemistry. Charlie Busenhart, wasn't he a co-teacher with during your years here?
Well, Charlie's still here.
Well, he's retired, but he comes back on
He tutors students now.
tutors. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you come back with Sisyphus. Yeah.
And Charlie taught. He taught here. He was drafted. At least he joined the Marines, I think. During Vietnam, and then he came back here.
I see.
And taught again for 45 years.
Yeah.
So, and he was always somebody who would tell you the truth as he saw it. And he knew chemistry, of course, but he also was an important figure for faculty members if you needed financial advice.
Really?
Charlie knew stuff about
Oh,
finance.
I did know that.
And
really.
it would help people out.
So he helped some of the other teachers. I mean, in
Yeah,
terms of
he-
giving them financial guidance.
Yeah, he is a great colleague. He still is. I mean, I talked to him the other night.
Did you?
He's still a great colleague. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he would come by and visit archives when we were in the building, and we always had a delightful conversation. He's just a delight to be with.
Yeah.
Another name, coach, but also a math teacher, Emmett Hannock, wasn't he?
He was a physics teacher, really.
Physics, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I taught geometry too, because I know I had him.
Oh, that's probably true.
Yeah, I had him for geometry one year. I think sophomore year.
Yeah.
But he was a well-known and highly respected coach, I think.
Won a couple of state tournaments. I believe.
Yes.
And he was a coach who believed that the coach's job was to instruct, not to motivate. The students should want to be motivated. And I think when we reached the 60s, there were some people who felt that Emmett didn't know how to make them want to win. Because his attitude was, they should want to win.
Yeah.
I'm going to teach them how to win.
Right.
You know? But he was also a frank, sometimes forthright person.
Right. Yes.
And a real rock on the faculty, I think. You know, the idea of being a teacher coach was sort of really true of him and of Ebby Dunn as well. They both were good at what they did as coaches, good at what they did as
teachers.
you
Yes.
know, and cared a lot about their teachers.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to wrap this up, but one last one. Bill George, was he on the faculty with you?
He was. We were. He came a year before I did, and only recently retired a couple of years ago. Yeah.
So you had many years together?
We're almost best buddies. You know, so, yeah.
A good relationship then.
Yeah.
Was
And he's a thoughtful, decent, deep human being. You know, who speaks quietly in class. But I think students know that how intensely he feels and thinks about what he teaches.
and respected him for that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Glad you mentioned him.
Rich, we're going to have to
Yeah, sure.
wind up simply because of the time thing,
Yeah.
but thank you so much for participating in the oral history project, and
Yeah.
you're sharing, frankly, your experiences here at St. Lucie High over 40 plus years,
Yeah.
and plus your years. Thank you very much for being part of this. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
Thank
Will.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.